notes from the new Votes for Women space at the Nashville Public Library's Special Collections Center. Inspired by Tennessee's role as the final state to ratify the 19th Amendment, the Votes for Women space serves as a destination for discovery and inquiry, and to introduce our audience to new narratives and themes in America's history. We can't wait to see you again when the library opens to engage in new conversations about women's history, equality, democracy, and the right to vote.
Welcome, everyone, to the 32nd Annual Southern Festival of Books, virtually, here from Nashville, Tennessee, presented by Humanities Tennessee. If anyone would love to do so, we sure would appreciate donations. You can do that to support the Southern Festival of Books by clicking on Humanities Tennessee in your web browser. I believe it's humanitiestennessee.org. I'll double check on that in a moment. Also want to thank, besides on behalf of Humanities Tennessee, Metro Nashville Arts Commission, Ingram Content Group, the Tennessee Arts Commission, Vanderbilt University, and of course our local bookstore, Parnassus Books. It can ship anywhere in the United States and I think the world. You purchase any of these authors' books at Parnassus, a portion of those proceeds will go to Southern Festival of Books through Humanities Tennessee. Much appreciated. And again, we are so very grateful that you've chosen to join us here today. And today at this session, which will be roughly 45 minutes long, we have two fabulous authors, Charlotte Pence and David Havard. And they are here. I think Charlotte is in Mobile, Alabama. David is in Shreveport. But they're our neighbors on screen today. Hello, David. Hello, Charlotte.
Hello. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
We're so happy to have you. So honored to have you as part of our 32nd Annual Southern Festival of Books here in Nashville. And we look forward to seeing you in person next year.
That would be great. That'd be great. Thank you all for viewing and being here today.
It's a great honor.
Yeah. If you each like to say a greeting, feel free. This is for you, David and Charlotte. Charlotte, how about we start with you? I can do a little brief. There was so much I researched on both of you that I was just blown away. So it actually takes the reading glasses to put on because you're just fabulous, Charlotte. My heart is still pounding from reading some of your work. I'm blown away by your awards, multiple awards, folks, if you can see this. Very widely published and respected. You said several things that we may get into later in the session about your upbringing. Someone had asked, I think, what you had considered home. Maybe you're still hunting for your home. I think folks may want to know what you meant by that. Code is featured as one. Code is your latest work and is featured as one of 4 must-read poetry titles by the millions for July. A book suffused with genuine optimism without sentimentality. So many quotes speaking to such. I've got chill bumps when I read that because I want the listeners to know that I'm just a lady here that's read a little bit. But when your heart reads Charlotte's words, they'll speak to you. And her honors are well deserved. She's extremely well published. I mean, I could go on and on. I will let her tell you a little bit more about herself. And I know that most authors are very humble about their awards, but there were just so many reviews that just went on Charlotte. Leave that a little bit more to you. And with David, wow. David is a professor and is a professor of English. And click here. He's a poet and an essayist. The author of today's book, Weathering, Poems and Recollections, published by Mercer University Press this year. He's a native South Carolinian. He attended the University of South Carolina, where he studied under the well-known and famous James Dickey, and at the University of Virginia, where he completed his graduate studies with a doctoral dissertation on Thomas Hardy. Back into Charlotte, one last bit, blown away by both of you. I'm sure the other readers are as well. Ultimately, Code is Charlotte's book, is that someone says is a book about grief, specifically in how to accept it. These poems attest to how we preserve what is lost, not only through story and poetry, but also through nonverbal means like cave art and DNA. Wow. Wow.
Thank you, Brandi. That was really thoughtful and beautiful introductions for both of us. David, I definitely want to ask you something about Hardy. We'll get to that, I think, in just a few minutes when we can talk to each other, because I feel like Thomas Hardy would have a lot to say about this time period, as he was interested in. He knew grief, right? And so my latest book that came out in July is about illness, coping with illness, fighting against it, and also when people we love do pass away, how do we keep them close? That was kind of the central question that drove my writing with this book. So I had just 3 people close to me pass away within I think it was 2 years, and we all will experience this, right? But it was just so much all at once, just like a boom, boom, boom. And I kept just wanting them in my everyday life. And I also felt like my words weren't adequate, that telling someone who was grieving over their, teenage daughter who had passed away, there was nothing I was going to say that was going to make them feel better. And as a poet, to question words and their power, it rattled me to my core. So I'm going to read one poem here that actually ends the collection. And it speaks a little bit to something that I kept finding in this book when I was writing about grief. What I actually ended up writing about was our resilience. And I think that we've all been going through this in one way or the other with the virus. People have lost their jobs and homes and loved ones. But also I think all of us have had to mourn a life that isn't. And sometimes we can feel guilty about that. But still, anything that makes you stop and have to have a whole new schedule, whole new outlook, there's going to be mourning that comes about. So this poem is called Grief. When the sky is morning bright, 3 men will arrive in a pickup. Roofing hatchets, pry bars, and lawn rake will poke from the truck bed like steel flowers. Only the foreman will speak to you while the others hover at the curb. The foreman will tell you his plans, speaking slowly, simply, his voice deep as a hole in the ground. You offer, I hope it's not too hot for this work today, and he'll answer, mind over matter. Or is it matter over mind? No matter, never mind. The ladder will clink up, the roof shingles will smack down, the plywood you've never seen will swing off dark with water and rot. The house is laid bare to birds, to sun, to the warming ozone, to anyone bored enough to study the celled attic. Once the work is done, you'll thank them and go back inside. From the house, others will not notice a change. From the street, others will not notice a change in the house. The roof gray as before, yet a new weight rests. So what is to be done with this? The roof will mute its thoughts, push away the sun, the rain, push the squirrels back into the trees, and the walls will do what they always do. Crack without sound, refusing the mumbling ground. I'll talk about that poem a little bit later on if we'd like, but I just wanted to open things up with that, and then of course turn it over to David too, so he can share a poem.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. David, if you'd like to read now, we would love that.
Oh, okay, thanks. Um, I was thinking about what to read, and I saw a headline yesterday in the Washington Post, and it was something to the effect, right when we need a drink, the U.S. wine industry is experiencing an existential threat from, of course, the wildfires in California. And so I thought I would read this poem. It doesn't have anything to do with wildfires. It looks back perhaps at a happier time. But one of the themes of my book, which is called Weathering, is mortality and transformation, or mortality and metamorphosis. And this is a birthday poem. I have a birthday coming up this coming week. And this poem is actually set in Sonoma County, California, where I used to spend some time every year. And I think probably the only thing that I really need to tell you that maybe you won't know is that a prairie wolf is not a real wolf. It's a coyote, or as they say in California, a coyote. And this poem is called Becoming Sage, as in becoming wise, becoming sage. We went for a drive, those two old men and I. I drove, and Milo, whose car it was, rode shotgun. Earl, in back, wrinkled his nose in the rearview mirror. That smell, what is it? Drove west, the river glinting with sunlight running beside us, the redwoods lunging sunward out of view. And then, so steep were the cliffs and such a long way down it was to the shoreline, whose rocks the ocean kept pawing with foam, even while swimming sleekly, if not forever outward, all the way to the sky, south along the coast and inland. Mice gnawed through the wiring, Milo said of his vintage T-Bird, which shared the garage with this car. Must be a mouse. In here, you mean? Earl shifted his weight. Somewhere in here, there's a carcass? We lean, my host and I, on his wooden railing. Last night, did you hear it? The wildcat? So that's what it was. Lying awake in the dark, I pictured from school days a planetarium's dome of heavenly bodies, the night sky whole, as I, a city boy, had never seen it, while to my ears they seemed, those planets and stars, among which there were some that weren't there now, were tributaries only, sourceless streams of milky light, to clot and drown in globs of rain, through which somehow a sharp scream like a probe had stabbed me awake. The Mexicans, Milo remarks, were scheduled to start at 2 a.m. I watched them yesterday, early, creeping with plastic tubs along the rows of vines. How they'd each grab a purple bunch and slice it off with a short, curved blade. Too wet today. No rain, though, Milo gestures. See the silver linings? The clouds, they're gray, or puffy white. Maybe, I say. He squints at me, testing me, is he? Can you? He says. Tonight, we charcoal steaks. Today was my birthday. Uncork a years-old red from when our host made wine. He sniffs it, wrinkles his nose and tastes, pokes out his bottom lip and shakes his head. Wine is a living thing, and this Merlot, either it was getting really good, like nothing the two of you have ever drunk, or else it was going bad. I quaff it. We toast with one of his Syrahs. The night sky's back to spilling milky light from many points. That river is running. I drift as though downriver. Earl and I, when driving in, had to brake for a wolf. The dashboard clock told midnight, and there on our left in moonlight lay the asylum. Look, I said, an inmate's escaping. Milo scoffed when told. A prairie wolf, you mean? In one of those tipsy, cup-like boats I drift, becoming sage or not. It scampered under our high beams, a werewolf. We'll start tomorrow, the Mexicans will, on the Cabernets. Small grapes, Milo observes. They yield less juice, but the flavor is more complex. Thanks, that's it.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Charlotte, for those wonderful readings. Wow,
Thank
thank
you.
you so much. So David, since you just read your poem, in that poem, is there something that triggered you to write that originally? Are you in a certain state of mind when you wrote that, or can you explain a little bit more?
Yeah, well, most of my poems come from, something happens, right? And it seems significant, and I don't necessarily know quite why it does. And I think that I write to discover the significance of whatever it is. And that poem, actually, I think, to be perfectly honest, that I've conflated two incidents or two separate trips. One of them was the birthday trip, and I think the other one was maybe coming into Glen Ellen and passing by it's sort of an asylum and seeing that wolf run across the road. I think that was a separate trip, but it doesn't really matter. That they seem to work together, and so the challenge for me was sort of putting it all together and discovering sort of the significance of it, so that the poem had what I thought was a kind of unity.
Unity and a richness to it. I certainly saw lots of symbolism, heard lots of. Charlotte may want to say something as well about your poem, Charlotte.
Yeah, I was just thinking, David, when you were talking about you might have conflated a couple of events, but I mean, what's that famous quote? Never let the truth get in the way of a good story. That's just what we have to do to be able to deliver like something that's compressed, right? Life isn't going to often unfold in a perfect 3-hour event that we can then put in a 3-minute poem, right? But yeah, I absolutely loved all of the details of the environment that you gave us, and it's just heartbreaking to think of what's happening out there with the wildfires. When was the last time you visited out there, David?
I don't really know. It's been probably maybe 4 or more years, 4 or 5 years. The characters in the poem, besides myself, are real people. Milo was Milo Shepherd. He was the grandson of Jack London's stepsister. And so the location of the poem is actually the Jack London Ranch in Glen Ellen, California. And Earl is Earl Labor, who was my longtime colleague at Centenary College of Louisiana. And Earl is Jack London's biographer. He published a big biography of Jack London just a few years ago. And so Earl and I used to go out there every year for quite a number of years. And sometimes I would go out there by myself, and it was a wonderful place to be. And Milo actually grew grapes, and just as in the poem, and sold his grapes to Kenwood, which were then bottled with a special Jack London label. So you can still buy this wine. It's Kenwood, and it's got a wolf head on on the label and Jack London's signature. But those come from that particular ranch.
Oh, and your birthday, you said, is this week, this coming week?
It's on Wednesday.
Well, you may have to go back. Happy birthday. Yeah.
I would have to go back as a firefighter, I think.
Maybe, right? And so, Charlotte, back around to your poem that you read. Would you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so in the poem, I'm sure you were able to pick up on the idea of taking off a roof and putting on a new one is like a stand-in metaphor for what it feels like when you've lost something. From the outside, you look like the same person, but there's a lot, but you aren't, right? And so then we'll get to that line near the end. The woman has gone back inside, but yet a new weight rests. And what's to be done with this? Like the new weight of a heavier roof.
Right.
And it's just that kind of speaking to like, you don't know what to do with it. Grief is a very frustrating emotion because after the funeral, we don't have a lot of traditions in our culture of then different things that we can do. Right. And, actually this was about 8 years ago. I actually went on this island, Sulawesi in Indonesia, where it was an island that always was celebrating death. It was a very different experience. So the houses were painted black. The houses are also shaped with the roof, speaking of, are shaped like a giant ship. Because the idea is when you're born, I don't know if I can do this with the camera. Okay. When you're born, you're right here, and then life is just kind of like you sliding down and going back up into heaven. And so the roof had that sort of that curve to it. When a child is born, instead of saving up for college, like we might hear, if you're so lucky to do that, you save for the funeral. And so we get off the boat because it's not a negative. It's not a negative. It's a going home. And so we get off the boat and we're instantly invited to someone's funeral. And I'm like, I don't know this person. They're like, but that's okay. Everyone's coming. and it was beautiful. And it also, the person had passed away. I believe it was like a year ago. So so it was a year process, and it was ending with this huge community celebration. So it just kind of reminded me. It's funny how I hadn't remembered that until just now. And I bet it was there, right? Because the roof was so important to it. But just what do we do? And it's too often something that's done in isolation.
Very interesting. Thank you so much for that. I think we had a couple of questions. Are y'all ready for some questions?
Yeah.
David? Okay. First question is going to David. David, how did a book consisting of poems and prose and essays even come about? So your whole book, Weathering. How did that come about?
Well, let's see if I can give a short answer to this. So the book, there are 3 sections of new poems, and then there's a section of prose memoir pieces, prose essays, and then at the end there's a section of early poems. And the thing is, I had the 3 essays. The essays are all about, altogether, they sort of chart my coming of age as a poet. That sounds a little pretentious, but my coming of age as a poet through encounters with some very famous poets when I was very young. And so they really are, in a way, the work of an old guy looking back on his youth and thinking about where all of this started, And so I had these 3 essays, and they made a kind of unity. And I thought, well, in each of the essays, I talk about a poem that came out of these encounters. And I thought, well, I could put the 3 essays together and then have an appendix of these early poems, and have a short book of about, 60 or 70 pages. But I had, in the meantime, 20 odd new poems, and it had seemed to me that those poems and the essays, especially the two most recently written essays, had come out of sort of the same impulse, and that they were all sort of, I don't know, unified by a theme of feeling. This is a quote from a poem by James Dickey, which serves as the epigraph to the book. But this feeling of when you're older, being more in two worlds than one, you know? And so I thought, well, why don't I put the new poems in along with the essays and let's see what it looks like. And I did. And I liked it. I thought, okay, it worked for me. But it was such an unusual sort of thing. I thought, well, um, I queried Mark Jolly at Mercer and at Mercer University Press and said, look, I've got this thing. If you're going to reject it because you don't publish essays and poems together, just let me know and I won't send it. He said, no, he said, send it on. We would like to see it. And so I thought, well, depending on his response, if he wrote back and rejected it and said, well, depending on what he said, maybe I would just drop the idea. But he took it. So anyway, that's sort of the long and the short of it.
Wow. Did it take a lot of editing time to get that together too, or is it just kind of ready to the way you originally presented it? Did it stay that way?
Yeah. I mean, well,
for the most part.
I think I drive these. I know I drive these people crazy because I make. I'm making revisions in the proofing stage, and they don't like this. But they were very patient with me, I have to say, and so I'm very grateful to them.
Well, congratulations.
I do that too. That poem that I actually read, that was the last poem. And why it's at the end of the book is because they had already said that, the whole book had been designed. I'm like, oh, one more. But, David, I'm glad you mentioned that about the poems and the essays. So my latest book, it has 2 short essays in it. And I was surprised how often people were asking me about that. Like, whoa, essays and poems. And I'm like, well, why not? You know, I mean, I really, and so I'm so glad to know that you do that too. But do you have any idea why there's that hesitance? Why it might be surprising to some?
I don't know, but it's really not something you see too much. Though there's a new book. Stan Plumley has a posthumous book that's just come out, and I haven't gotten it yet. I'm expecting it for my birthday. But I know that there's a big prose section there that he had been working on a kind of memoir and then ditched it. Maybe I don't know why. He was ill. Maybe he couldn't complete it. But he did complete this manuscript. I mean, it's as he designed it, and I know there's a big chunk in there of prose. And why not? I mean, especially if you're writing. Well, I mean, even if you're not, but in my case, I tend to write from a kind of autobiographical impulse. I mean, things happen to me, and I write about them, and so in an essay, you have to explain things. In a poem, you convey it, or you imply it, or dramatize it. But there were actually parts of these longer pieces that I had originally thought would be poems, but for some reason or other, I didn't work on them that way and ended up writing something much longer.
Charlotte, we actually have a question for you that's come in, and I am watching the clock, so just remember we have about right at 15 minutes left, I think. Charlotte, again, this is directed to you. You use a lot of persona in your poetry. How do you go about creating the new personas so that they sound authentic?
Oh, yeah. I think this might be raised in the South. I love stories, right? And so I don't do a ton of narrative poetry, but I do like to have characters. And so for this book in particular, there's a center story where it's it's a mother, a young mother who's just had a child, and she's dying of an inherited disease. And I have her own DNA as a character. And so DNA starts talking. And it was so fun to write DNA. I first had to research DNA for about 3 years. And so that kind of happens with any persona. I really tried to imagine like where they live, what's on their nightstand. I follow the fiction questionnaires that you'll find of like, imagine what's in your character's fridge right now. And what does your character have bad dreams about? So, I do all that sort of work. But the other thing that I do is I'll give each of my characters in my poems different forms. So I had DNA's poems are always in triplets because DNA codes in series of 3. Like 3 nucleotides will create 1 amino acid that then goes on to make us.
Fascinating.
Yeah, and then there's the husband character, who's the husband of the woman who's dying. I'm not dying. This was all fictional. Well, I am dying, but you know what I mean. But then the husband character, he's always in quatrains because he's wanting to keep the family unit and that stereotypical, 2 kids and 2 partners. So he's always quatrains. But I would also read, before I would write a poem for each of my characters, I picked a poet who I wanted to try to emulate, just someone very different from me. So I would read their poems before I would start writing in that character's voice.
Wow.
To almost like flesh my own self out, if that makes any sense.
Wow. Sounds like you're extremely disciplined from an inward sort of.
I guess I am. I love digging in to research, and I don't mind. I hate the first draft, but I love revisions, so I don't mind doing.
Would you hold a cover of your book up for us to see? I know I saw David's twice, so I loved your cover too. So the title of her book, everyone, is Code. DNA, and you really have to read it we don't have enough time today to speak with either one of you as far as I'm concerned.
No. If you don't mind, it's DNA is of course the code, but also the epigraph is the word code comes from the Latin for codex, and that was the wooden pith of the tree from where we first got our paper.
Wow.
Isn't that interesting?
I did not know that. Very interesting. We're so close on time, and I have more questions coming in. Boy, this is tough. Okay, I think it's fair to read. I'm looking at the clock. This one is from someone named Linda. So thank you, Linda. Yes, and it is directed to both of you. So that's why I'm choosing this. It's more of a fair question. Charlotte and David, both of your books expand the usual boundaries of poetry collections in containing prose and essays as well as poems. I'm seeing this in various new works, such as Nikki Finney's New Work and your own. Do you see this new hybrid as the beginning of a new chapter for poets in general? I see that you're both answering this question as I write it. So if you want to expand on that, each of you we'd still have a little bit of time if you want to read before we close out. I'll leave it to you.
David, do you want to add anything to that question?
No, not really. All I would say is that, I have sometimes felt that I needed more space, in a poem, but because I do have this narrative impulse, and one of the things that sort of interested me was what Czeslaw Milosz does. He'll have these sort of long poems that have, part that they'll be in verse, and then he'll have a section in prose, and sometimes the sections in prose are not even by him. I mean, maybe he will insert something that he's been reading that pertains to the subject, and I've really found that very interesting. I haven't done it myself, but it suggests that this sort of thing, this hybrid, has been going on for a while. And I mean that, so that you'll actually have a poem that's partly in verse and partly in prose, and not just, say with a poet like Baudelaire, where and in the French tradition where you actually have prose poems. That's would be something that we haven't really quite embraced in English as to the extent that the French did.
And Charlotte, would you like to respond?
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting. We were talking about that right when it was being typed up. For me, I find that essay is a much better genre for conveying information, and poetry is a much better genre for conveying experience. And even, I don't mean that in a narrative way, but just like in how did that feel? What did you think about it? And so sometimes you just need to use the other genre. But I just feel like this is a time where boundaries are shifting, right? I mean, think about like, Hamilton, the American musical.
Oh yeah.
Right. Like part of the genius of that work. And Lin-Manuel Miranda would say, no, don't call me a genius, because he wants to be clear how much work went in that, but he's genius. Part of the genius of that work is how it mixes things, tones, rap, musical, narrative, in ways that helps us see the truth better, right? I think we're really craving truth. And
I love that.
We're willing to do whatever it might take to get there.
Right. I'm looking at the clock again, and I'm showing we've got just a few minutes left. I'd like for the readers and fans to know just briefly. Do you answer your emails if people were to write you? You each have your own websites.
Yeah,
it might take me a little while, but absolutely.
So folks, if you're watching today, you can reach either of these authors. They each have their own websites and their places where you can write to them there. Certainly read their books. We have Weathering with David and Code with Charlotte. I'll repeat those, and you can buy them at bookstores, I'm sure, across America. Today, of course, Parnassus Bookstore. Anybody that wants to order one, some proceeds of that will go to Southern Festival Books. So we especially stress that, and they'll send Charlotte and David's books straight to your house. We have just a couple of minutes I want to squeeze in. How about if I gave each of you, looking at the clock, 2 minutes? You don't have to read a whole poem. If you have a little piece of something you want to share, like Charlotte grabbed me with her DNA she just mentioned. It will let who went first last time? Which one of you read first?
I did. So
okay, David, you got a couple minutes. Just we got to do this on a time limit. So
do I really have? I wonder if I have just a poem that's short.
Do you have a piece of something? Maybe there's a certain phrase or a line or two that you just remember. Just kind of you thought. Sometimes writers will write something and think, "Oh, I like that. I can't believe I just wrote that great line." And if you're still looking, we could let Charlotte go.
This is one of the shorter poems in the book. It's my wife really doesn't much like it, but I like it. It's called "The Spell," and it's one of my poems that is set in Greece, and it focuses in on a sandal that was in a museum, and on the bottom, on the sole of the sandal, it said "Follow me," and of course, it belonged to a prostitute.
Oh.
And
no wonder your wife doesn't like it. I'm just kidding.
And I should tell you also, I was delighted actually to find out that the word for a man on the make in Greek is the same word as the word for harpoon. So this is called "The Spell." I picture you with a knife in one hand, the sandal upside down in the other, wanting a third to angle a mirror. Follow me, your footprints spell in the dust. Amid the rubble on either side of the street of tombs, not a steely standing. That would be a tombstone. Where have you swished off to? Cruised through what gates leer? I've come ashore with harpoon eyes. Toxic white with mulberry lips, swinging your hips on the fishtail. That's a poem about the predatory male gaze, you see.
Wow. Now I think I know why your wife doesn't want you to read that. Wow. Charlotte, can you have a little juice, a little something you can share too?
Absolutely. I'll give you just the first stanza. of DNA talking in the book. And I have DNA always speak in the first person plural here. And so DNA says, what is death to us? We've heard that myth. It's a ghost story to tell around a campfire. We're too busy to think. Our copies constantly clamor around our waists like children. They rush from their cramped classrooms into the red light of the first time, wanting a push on the swings. So in that poem, and in line with the DNA poems, I'm imagining DNA has a much longer idea of what life is. And it's not just my discrete unit from birth to death dates, but it's your entire lineage. And so she's like, there is no death. Let's just keep going. So that's the opening of that poem, imagining DNA as a nursery school teacher.
Yeah,
that's fascinating.
That's great. That's terrific.
It is. I agree.
Oh, thank you.
Wow. Again, I'm looking at the clock. We have 4 minutes left and ticking. So I think we did really well today. It's very obvious when you're in Nashville at the Southern Festival of Books, some of our sessions can go a hair over, and we could have 20 or 30 people raising their hand, and looks like we're running close to the end of time. Is there anything in closing that either of you would like to say right now? Because I'd like to give you that opportunity.
Well, I just want to say thank you, Brandi. I was a host a couple times at Southern Festival of Books, and it is a lot of work. It's going to be a lot of pressure too. So you've done a beautiful job, and thank you. But I just love Southern Festival of Books. I'm sad to not be there in Nashville. I'm trying not to be a baby about it. But
we miss you.
But I'm so pleased though that it is virtual, and this will be able to let more people attend from all across the country and not have to worry about the cost of it, or us viewers.
Yeah.
So thank you to everybody who has done so much hard work in making this event go off so smoothly.
Yes, thank you so much. Yes, it's a real honor to be part of it. Yes.
And I will remind our viewers too that when Charlotte meant cost, you might have to spend money on a hotel room unless you have a friend in Nashville, which you guys do now, right here. But the event itself, the Southern Festival of Books, is always held the second weekend of October of every year. The event is free. Poetry and prose and music for children, for adults, every age. And you get to meet your favorite authors and get them to sign your books. And I'm assuming you too, are you having signed books on your website available for folks that might want a signed copy?
Absolutely. And I send a toy with mine.
Oh, you do?
Of course.
There you go, folks. And what about you, David? Would you sign autograph as well?
I have not advertised it, but absolutely.
Wonderful.
I'll sign them.
Wonderful. It's so wonderful to know. Again, everyone, thank you so much for joining us at the Southern Festival of Books virtually. This is the 32nd year, sponsored by Humanities Tennessee. We certainly appreciate any donations. You can go to the Humanities Tennessee website and watch a recording of this event, as well as any of the other sessions, with the click of a button. So we hope to see you again next year, both of you, David and Charlotte, in person. I think I need my signed autograph copies too. I think I'll be writing to you. But thank you so much. I wish we had more time for you to read. Again, we are right on time. I mean, classes are on. We have a few seconds. So, I like yours. I need some like that.
And I also didn't get a chance to say, David, how I really love being able to get to know your work through this. So I'm looking. So you have a new fan.
The feeling is mutual. Absolutely. Thank you.
Oh, wonderful. Well, again, thank you, Southern Festival of Books. Thank you, Ingram Book Content and Parnassus Books. I know I've mentioned them several times, but they certainly have been a part of this since day one in 1989 when this began, which I was there. And the Metro Nashville Arts Commission and the Tennessee Arts Commission, as well as Vanderbilt University. Don't want to forget those folks either. And folks, watch the other sessions this weekend. They're going to be going on for a whole nother day. Bye, David. Bye, Charlotte.
Bye, everybody.